In the darkness, something was gripping his leg. Where is he, the rich foreigner? Hissed the wizard. Quickly! I've got him at Broadman's place. With only his homemade phrase book to help him, Two-Flower was trying to explain the mysteries of inn-sewer ants to Broadman. The fat innkeeper was listening intently, his little black eyes glittering. From the other end of the table, Emor watched. Beside him, Stren Withel paced up and down. It was strange, but the little man didn't seem to realise the seriousness of his position. He'd been talking for ages to Broadman, and Emor had seen a piece of paper. Broadman had given the foreigner some coins. It was strange. When Broadman got up and waddled past Emor's chair, the thief master's arm shot out like a steel spring and grabbed the fat man by the apron. What was all that about, friend?
Nothing, Emor, just private business like.
There are no secrets between friends, Broadman.
Yeah, well, I'm not sure about it myself, really. It's sort of a bet, see?
Said the innkeeper nervously.
Inn-sewer ants, it's called. It's like a bet that the broken drum won't get burned down.
Emor laughed. The man must be mad.
He says now he's got the, can't remember the word, begins with a P. It's what you might call the state money. The people he works for in the Agatian Empire will pay up if the broken drum burns down. Not that I hope it does burn down, the broken drum. I mean, it's like home to me, is the drum.
The door slammed back on its hinges and thudded into the wall.
Hey, that's my door!
Screamed Broadman. Then he ducked behind the table, a mere shaving of time before a short black dart sped across the room and thumped into the woodwork. Emor moved his hand carefully and poured out another flagon of beer. Won't you join me, Zlorf? He said levelly. I'll put that sort of way straight. Zlorf Flanelfoot is our friend. The president of the Assassin's Guild spun his short blowgun dexterously and slotted it into its holster in one smooth movement. He strolled down the stairs, followed by a number of assassins. When he was directly in front of Emor, he said, "I've come with a tourist. Is he that funny-looking one over there?" Yes. Zlorf stared at Two-Flower, who grinned at him. "Who is your client, I ask?" said Emor. Zlorf held up a hand. "Please," he protested. "Professional etiquette." "Oh, of course. By the way..." The door flew open, badly damaging the assassin who was standing beside it.
Stop doing that!
Shrieked Broadman from under his table. Zlorf and Emor stared up at the figure on the threshold. It was short, fat, and richly dressed. There were a number of tall, big shapes looming behind it. "Who's that?" said Zlorf. "I know him," said Emor. "His name's Roth. He runs the Groaning Platter Tavern down by Brass Bridge. Stren, remove him." Several very large trolls ducked under the doorway and stood on either side of the fat man, blinking in the light. Muscles the size of melons bulged in forearms like flour sacks. Each troll held a double-headed axe between thumb and forefinger. "What do you want?" said Emor.
"I'm here on behalf of the Guild of Merchants and Traders," said Roth eagerly. "To protect our interests, you might say. Meaning the little man. I'm Vice Guild Master in charge of tourism, you know."
Emor wrinkled his brow. "Tourism?
"Stands to reason," said Roth. "People robbing and murdering all over the place. What sort of impression are visitors going to take away? You come to see our fine city and you wake up dead in some back alley? How are you going to tell all your friends what a great time you're having? Let's face it, you've got to move with the times."
Zlorf and Emor exchanged gaze. "We have," said Emor. "This one," breathed Zlorf. In one movement, he brought his blowgun to his mouth and sent a dart hissing towards the nearest troll. That was the start. Wizards, even failed wizards, have, in addition to words cars of Moorcourt with the luggage trundling behind him, jostled a tall, dark figure, turned to deliver a few suitable curses, and beheld death. It had to be death. No one else went around with empty eye sockets, and of course the side over one shoulder was another clue. "Rincewind," Death said, in tones as deep and heavy as the slamming of leaden doors far underground. "No," said Rincewind. "Why are you here?" "Why not?" said Rincewind. "I have an appointment with thee this very night." "Oh, no, not..." "I was expecting to meet thee in Cephalopolis." "But that's 500 miles away." "I could lend you a very fast horse." "No!" "It won't hurt a bit." "No!" Rincewind turned and ran. Death watched him go and shrugged. Short Street, Moorcourt, is in fact one of the longest in the city. The Broken Drum is so placed that it looks down the full length of the street. Inside, the war was going well. At the furthermost end of Short Street, a dark oblong rose on hundreds of tiny legs and started to run. By the time it was halfway up the street, it was moving arrow fast. A darker shadow inched its way along one of the walls of the drum, a few yards from the two trolls who were guarding the door. One of the trolls tapped his colleague on the shoulder. He pointed down the starlit street. Rincewind darted from his hiding place, turned, and hurled his burden through the drum's nearest window. The bag arced across the room, turning slowly in the air, and burst on the edge of a table. A moment later, gold coins were rolling across the floor, spinning, glittering. 70 men and a dozen trolls froze in mid-groan. Outside, there was a sudden crescendo of running feet, and for the last time, the door opened. In fact, it exploded. Door and frame landed on a table, which flew into splinters. It was then that the frozen fighters noticed that there was something else in the pile of wood. It was a box, shaking itself madly to free itself of the smashed timber around it. Rincewind appeared in the ruined doorway, hurling another of his gold grenades. It smashed into a wall, showering coins. Down in the cellar, the old man looked up, muttered to himself, and carried on with his work. His entire supply of candles had already been strewn on the floor, mixed with his store of kindling wood. Now he was attacking a barrel of lamp oil. "Insurance," he muttered. Oil gushed out and swirled around his feet. Withell stormed across the floor, his face a mask of rage. Rincewind took careful aim and caught the thief full in the chest with a bag of gold. Emor was shouting and pointing an accusing finger. A raven swooped down from its perch in the rafters and dived at the wizard, talons open and about large as a palm leaf, red as mahogany, to lick up a few errant feathers. At the same time, the giant candle wheel fell from the ceiling, plunging the room into gloom. Rincewind, coiling himself like a spring, gave a standing jump and grasped a beam, swinging himself up into the relative safety of the roof with a strength that amazed him. Rincewind rolled. For a moment he thought Withell was going to spit him where he lay. It was worse than that. He was waiting for him to get up. "I see you have a sword, wizard," he said quietly. "I suggest you rise. We shall see how you use it." Rincewind stood up as slowly as he dared. "You know that wizards can't be killed by edged weapons." Withell smiled. "That's all," he said. "I look forward to putting it to the test." As his sword went back, the sullen glow that had been growing in the doorway of the Broken Drum flickered, dimmed, and erupted into a roaring fireball that sent the walls billowing outward and carried the roof 100 feet into the air. Withell stared at the boiling flames unnerved. Flames were racing along the rooftops on either side of the street. Rincewind grabbed Two Flower's arm and dragged him down the street. Something was puzzling Rincewind. "I'm sure all the candles went out," he said. "So how did the drum catch fire?" "No," replied Two Flower. "It'll be a blow for old Broadman. Still, he was wise. I've still got the rhino he paid as his first premium." Rincewind didn't know the meaning of the word premium, but his mind was working fast. "You insured the drum. You bet Broadman it wouldn't catch fire." "Oh yes, standard valuation, 200 rhino. Why do you ask?" Rincewind turned and stared at the flames racing towards them, and wondered how much of Ankh-Morpork could be bought for 200 rhino. Quite a large piece, he decided. Bravd looked at the weasel and raised his eyebrows. "And that's it," said Rincewind. "The luggage caught Alice. Don't ask me how. Is there any more wine?" The weasel picked up the empty wine skin. "I think you've had just about enough this night," he said. He turned away and swung himself into the saddle of the horse that Bravd was holding. A few moments later, the two heroes were just specks under a cloud of dust. Rincewind stared muzzily at the recumbent tourist. A stray thought, wandering through the dimensions in search of a mind to harbour it, slid into his brain. "Here's another famous reason," he moaned, and slumped backwards. The Sending of 8. The Discworld offers sights far more impressive than those found in universes built by creators with less imagination but more mechanical aptitude. Perhaps the most magnificent sight is the hub. There, a spire of green ice 10 miles high rises through of Dun Manifesting, the abode of the Disc Gods. On this particular day, blind Io, by dint of constant vigilance, the chief of the gods, sat with his chin in his hand and looked at the gaming board on the red marble table in front of him. Blind Io had got his name because where his eye socket should have been, there was nothing but 2 areas of blank skin. His eyes, of which he had an impressively large number, led a semi-independent life of their own. Several were currently hovering above the table. The gaming board was a carefully carved map of the Discworld, overprinted with squares. A number of beautifully modelled playing pieces were now occupying some of the squares. An onlooker would, for example, have recognised in 2 of them the likenesses of Bravd and the Weasel. Still in the game were Io, Offler, the crocodile god, Zephyrus, the god of slight breezes. There was an air of concentration. Blind Io took up the dice box, which was a skull whose various orifices had been stoppered with rubies, and with several of his eyes on the lady, he rolled 3 5s. She smiled. This was the nature of the lady's eyes. They were bright green, lacking iris or pupil, and they glowed from within. The room was silent. She scrabbled in her box of pieces, and from the very bottom, produced a couple that she set down on the board with 2 decisive clicks. The rest of the players, as one god, craned forward to peer. Withered and thumbed for to play, nodded slightly. She picked up the dice cup and held it as steady as a rock, yet all the gods could hear the cubes rattling about inside. And then she sent them bouncing across the table. A 6, a 3, a 5. Something was happening to the 5, however. Battered by the chance collision of several billion molecules, the die flipped onto a point, spun gently, and came down a 7. Blind Io picked up the cue and counted the sides. "Come on," he said wearily. "Play fair." Two Flower was a tourist, the first ever seen on the Discworld. Tourist, Rincewind had decided, meant idiot. As they rode leisurely through the time-scented bee-humming air, Rincewind pondered on the experiences of the last few days. While the little foreigner was obviously insane, he was also generous. Rincewind rather liked him. Disliking him would be like kicking a puppy. Currently, Twoflower was showing a great interest in the theory and practice of magic. Rincewind was trying to explain that magic had once been wild and lawless, but had been tamed back in the mists of time by the olden ones. He went on to add that some of the ancient magic could still be found in its raw state, recognisable to the initiated by the eightfold shape it made in the crystalline structure of space-time. There was the metal octyron, for example, and the gas octogen. Both radiated dangerous amounts of raw enchantment. Rincewind turned in his saddle and glanced at Twoflower's luggage, which was currently ambling along on its little legs, occasionally snapping its lid at butterflies. There was a faint sound, hardly louder than the noise of the bees in the rosemary by the road. It had a curiously bony quality, as of rolling skulls or a whirling dice box. Rincewind peered around. There was no one nearby. There came a slight breeze. It grew and went in the space of a few heartbeats. It left the world unchanged, save in a few interesting particulars. There was now, for example, a 5-metre tall mountain troll standing in the road. It was exceptionally angry. This was partly because trolls generally are, in any case, but it was exacerbated by its sudden and instantaneous teleportation from its lair in the Ramarok Mountains 3,000 miles away. So, it bared its fangs and charged. Rincewind drew his sword, and with a smooth overarm throw, completely failed to hit the troll. The blade plunged on into the heather at the side of the track. There was the faintest of sounds, like the rattle of old teeth. The sword struck a boulder concealed in the heather. It sprang up like a leaping salmon, and in mid-ricochet plunged deeply into the back of the troll's grey neck. The creature grunted, and with blood gouged in the flank of Twoflower's horse, which screamed and bolted into the trees. The troll spun around and made a grab for Rincewind. Then, its sluggish nervous system brought it the message that it was dead. Thought Rincewind as his horse reared in terror. It staggered two-legged across the road, and then screaming, turned and galloped into the woods. Rincewind! The long aisles of trees threw Twoflower's voice from side to side and eventually tossed it back to him unheeded. He sat down on a rock and tried to think. He was lost. His luggage was missing. It was also starting to rain. He squirmed uncomfortably on the damp stone and tried to look on the bright side. For example, during its mad dash, his plunging horse had burst through some bushes and disturbed a she-bear with her cubs, but had gone on before the bear could react. Then, it had suddenly been galloping over the sleeping bodies of a large wolf pack, and again, its mad speed had been such that the furious yelping had been left far behind. Nevertheless, the day was wearing on, and perhaps it would be a good idea, Twoflower thought, not to hang about in the air. Perhaps there was a... He racked his brains trying to remember what sort of accommodation the forests traditionally offered. Perhaps there was a gingerbread house or something. The stone wasn't comfortable. Twoflower looked down, and for the first time noticed the strange carving. Like a spider. Was it a squid? Moss and lichens rather blurred the precise details. They didn't blur the runes carved below it. They said, "Traveller, the hospitable temple of Bel Shamharoth lies 1,000 paces upwards." Now, this was strange, Twoflower realised, because although he could read the message, the actual letters were completely unknown to him. Somehow, the message was arriving in his brain without the tedious necessity of passing through his eyes. He stood up and untied his horse from the saddle. He wasn't sure which way the hub lay. There seemed to be an old track of sorts leading between the trees. About 3 miles away, a failed wizard was hanging by his hands from a high branch in a beech tree. This was the end result of 5 minutes of crowded activity. First, an enraged she-bear had barged through the undergrowth and taken the throat out of his horse with one swipe of her paw. Then, as Rincewind had fled the carnage, he'd run into a glade in which a number of irate wolves were milling about. His instructors at Unseen University, who despaired of Rincewind's inability to master levitation, would have been amazed at the speed with which he reached and climbed the nearest tree without apparently touching it. Now, there was just the matter of the snake. It was large and green, and wound itself along the branch with reptilian patience. Rincewind wondered if it was poisonous, then chided himself for asking such a silly question. Of course it would be poisonous. "What are you grinning for?" he asked the figure on the next branch. "I can't help it," said Death. "Now would you be so kind as to let go? I can't hang around all day." "I can," said Rincewind defiantly. The wolves, clustered around the base of the tree, looked up with interest at their next meal, talking to himself. "It won't hurt," said Death. Rincewind noticed another branch crossing his dangerously narrowing one a few feet away. If he could just reach it. He swung himself forward, one hand outstretched. The branch, already bending, didn't break. It simply made a wet little sound and twisted. Rincewind found that he was now hanging onto the end of a tongue of bark and fibre, lengthening as it peeled away from the tree. He looked down, and with a sort of fatal satisfaction realised that he would land right on the biggest wolf. His elbow nudged something. It was the tree trunk. The strip had carried him right to the end of the branch. There were no other branches. The smooth bark beside him offered no handholds. Offered hands, though. Two were even now thrusting through the mossy bark beside him, slim hands, green as young leaves. Then a shapely arm followed, and then the Hamadryad leant right out and grasped the astonished wizard firmly and drew him into the tree. The solid bark parted like a mist, closed like a cloud. Blind Io pushed his stack of chips across the table and strode out. A few demigods tittered. At least Offler had taken the loss of a perfectly good troll with precise if somewhat reptilian grace. The latest last opponent shifted his seat until he faced her across the board. She said politely. He acknowledged. Their eyes met. Fate was a taciturn god. His were features that a maiden would confidently proffer a glass of small beer to, should they appear at her back door. His was a face a kindly youth would gladly help over a stile. Except for his eyes, of course. The lady... She took another chip. The others. The soul of a true hero always finds a better rate of exchange, and is valued highly by the gods. Fate raised an eyebrow. "And no cheating, lady," he said. "But who could cheat fate?" she asked. He shrugged. "No one, yet everyone tries." The lady smiled. "I believe I felt you giving me a little assistance against the others. But of course, so that the end game could be the sweeter, lady. And now..." He reached into his gaming box and brought forth a piece, setting it down on the board with a satisfied air. The watching deities gave a collective sigh. Even the lady was momentarily taken aback. It was certainly ugly. It seemed to be all suckers and tentacles, and mandibles, as the lady observed, and one great eye. Fate scooped the dice into the box and then glanced up. "Unless," he said, "you wish to resign." She shook her head. "Play," she said. Rincewind knew what was inside trees. Wood, sap, possibly squirrels, not a palace. Still, the cushions underneath him were definitely softer than wood. The wine in the wooden cup beside him was much tastier than sap, and there could be